Welcome everybody to the webinar from Abuse to Power. This event will be both in English and French. The slides here that you should see explain the interpretation system and how to choose your language.
You're going to look at the slides, and please know that you can choose your language for the interpreting service.
Hope it works for everyone and that everyone can now hear me or the interpreter in the language of your choice. All right, so we're going to start. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm Frédéric Mousseau. I'm the Policy Director at the Oakland Institute. At the last count, we had about 180 participants registered for the webinar, including colleagues from civil society organizations, academia, media from DRC and from around the world. So I give you all a very warm welcome. This event will run for 1 hour, 15 minutes. Our panelists are going to each make a short presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen if you want to send us a question. The Oakland Institute new report from Abuse to Power describes our fortress conservation based on the forced eviction of indigenous people from their land, leads to horrific human rights violations, facilitates the illicit extraction of mineral and other resources. It also shows that despite recent scandals in a park managed by large conservation NGOs such as WWF or WCS, they and the international donors that support them have failed to address violence and abuses by eco guards and security forces. The report calls for an urgent change of paradigm to end fortress conservation in DRC. We cannot protect the biodiversity if we don't protect and respect the basic rights of indigenous and local communities. After all, these are those who have effectively protected their territories for thousands of years until the colonizers came. We will hear today from the panelists about the situation and their insights on the way forward. I'm now going to move to French for first panelist.
I'm speaking now French for the first panelist. I'm talking about Blaise Mongossi from the Congolese NGO, the APEM. This acronym is an Congolese NGO which wishes to fight against injustices in the management of natural reserves and acting as an advocacy for supporting the indigenous education in terms of education. Blaise has been working this topic for many years. Firstly, we're going to ask him to briefly describe the problems in the forest conservation in DRC. He's live from Kinshasa. Blaise, thank you for being here. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Frédéric. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm really happy to be here in this call about a very important topic in our country, which is the human rights and conservation. As you may know, DRC has a huge potential in terms of wildlife, and today there's a huge, one of the biggest network of natural areas, protected natural areas in Africa. It's about 94% of its territory. It's composed of 9 national parks with 63 reserves and hunting areas. And as mentioned in the report, we are in a conservation mindset we inherited from the colonization. It's still on, despite everything that we are working on and all the work we are implementing. And I'm going to present the context and what's on today, and in our conversation discussions we could go further. What is true is that we are in a very strict conservation mindset, especially for the parks and their integral reserves, and there is a partial conservation as well with some communities in their protected areas and some reserves and for some hunting areas. So when we are having a look at things that are going on, all these protected areas are under management of the CINC, the Congolese Institute for Nature Conservation. It's a public establishment, public institution, public agency. It's working with many different partnerships, and they are involved into the protection of private lands, and this is why in many different important sites we are working with huge conservation agencies which are working with the CINC for the conservation of these sites. For us as a civil society organization, it's important to have to working close by with these organizations, because we do think that they are going to implement some preservation and conservation projects, and that they are going to respect the human rights in these protected areas. As Frédéric just mentioned, there are some protected areas, and because some people were living in these areas, people who could protect these areas until today, and today we are talking about a huge potential in wildlife protection. But when these protected areas were created, well, there's a full story. Some areas were created before the colonization. Some areas were created right after the colonization in the 1970s. And some other protected areas, were created in 2006. And another park has been created in 2016, right after the bill, the law that just evolved regarding the right of these communities in 2014. We are noticing that everywhere in these protected areas in DRC, there are many problems, still many issues linked or due to the expulsions by creating these areas, we need to move some populations and some villages out of these areas. So this has been the case in many different sites. And in all these, we need to consider the resources, because some areas today are protected areas, but for some many years, this area were areas of life for the local communities. They were extracting their foods and their natural medicines in this area from the forest, because forest for these communities, forest is life. So today and now, where they've been living now ever since, they are not really welcome, because they are constantly reminded that they belong to the other area, the area where they have been moving out from. So we can see many different situations like this. So the question of the management by the police that really put in danger the situation of this population, because some populations are carrying weapons, are armed, and they do not have the police authority is armed. They do not necessarily have the appropriate training, and sometimes they are in training in terms of weapons management and human rights issues. So that sometimes we can see that the state is intervening at some that they can consider out of the laws. So we do our best, but it's not so easy. Beyond that, there's the whole question of the local conflicts in some areas, that there are no solutions for this conflict. So at some point we are in some situations with many different problems, many different issues to manage. And when we see the way the CINC works with these armed people who are using their weapons to protect their sites, and how much they earn, what is their income, and what level of education they have. And the other problems of the law superposition that can affect these areas, because today in the protected areas there are some minerals, there are some ores. When we saw the picture at the very beginning, this is a reserve with coltan, with many other minerals and ores in the ground and the subsoils, and behind the exploitation there are many things. Maybe we can talk about it, but there's always as well the conflict of the borders, because in some areas the border is not really well established. So it's difficult at some point to really know where the protected area starts and where the local area starts as well. So all this work you are implementing and the work we are doing set things forward. We could see the CINC. Sorry, Blaise, I'm interrupting you. Sorry about that. We will be talking about that later on regarding the recent evolutions and the ongoing evolution. Sorry about that. I just want us to really understand, and then we will be talking about these evolutions. Thank you very much for setting the context. Now, you were talking about the strict applications of the conservation. We wanted to illustrate that with a specific case of Kaouzi Biega with our second panelist. Kaouzi Biega is the NKB, and Jean-Marie Bantou. Sorry, the interpreters are just telling us to speak a bit slowly, a bit more slowly. Thank you very much, and sorry about that. So Jean-Marie Bantou has been working with another Congolese NGO called Environnement, Ressources Naturelles et Développement, ERND Institute. ERND defends and promotes the rights for the local and indigenous communities for the preservation of the nature based on rights, so community right-based conservation. Jean-Marie is live from Bukavu, capital of South Kivu, in the east of the country. He is working to defend the rights of the indigenous populations. Thank you very much, Jean-Marie, for being here. Could you talk to us about the indigenous population in Kebe and Kaouzi Biega and their fights for their rights, please? Thank you. Thank you very much, Blaise. You have summarized the way these national parks has been creating all these protected areas in our country. Here, I would like to say hi to all the panelists, especially I can see Samuel from the African Commission.
And here I would like to speak to conservation in the Kaouzi Biega National Park. We're in South Kivu, at the east of the DRC. The specific case with communities that are impacted by the conservation policies. We've got the Batwa from the Kaouzi Biega, who were on their fatherland, and since 1970, more than half a century, there is a decree from the president who took over who
battoirs de
designated
Kaouzi-Biega
the lands
en
of
aire
these
protégée.
people as a
Et cette aire protégée,
protected
c'est
area.
le parc de Kaouzi-Biega. Alors,
The
cela s'est passé
procedure
de
was
façon très
brutal and
cavalière,
violent.
brutale et avec beaucoup de violence.
The first
Donc, la première ordonnance avait
order
étendu
was
la
to establish
réserve
a
à
reserve
600
of
hectares,
600 hectares,
ce qui a fait
which meant
que
that
tous les peuples autochtones
the
pygmées,
Pygmies had
batois,
to leave
quittent
their
leurs terres
ancestors' land.
ancestrales.
They
Ils ont
went
quitté, ils se sont retirés
to
dans les
neighboring
zones
zones in the
d'à
forest.
côté,
In
toujours dans leurs forêts.
75,
Mais en
there was
1975,
another
il y a
decree
eu une autre
that
ordonnance qui leur a demandé
totally
finalement de
excluded
quitter
them from the
totalement
forest.
la forêt.
And that's
Et c'est à
then
ce
that they
moment-là qu'ils sont allés
took
se
refuge
réfugier
in neighboring
dans des
villages
villages voisins qui sont
in three
localisés dans
territories. The
3
first one
territoires.
is
D'abord
the
le territoire
Cabaret
de Kabare,
territory,
le
Kabylie,
territoire de Kalehe,
and others
et d'autres
immigrated
ont émigré jusque
in the
dans
middle
l'île
of the
d'Idjui,
Lake Kivu
au milieu
on the
du lac
island.
Kivu. Et donc,
That was
cela a
done
été
without
fait
any
sans
consultation
consultation,
nor
sans indemnisation. Et que
compensation.
donc, depuis une
For
cinquantaine
the
d'années,
past 50
ces
years,
communautés
these people
vulnérables
live
vivent dans des
in
situations
terrible
déplorables.
situation.
Eh bien,
Since the forest
dès
was
que la forêt a été
established
érigée en parc,
as a park
qui est
and
gardé par
supervised by the
des
eco
rangers,
guards,
des éco-gardes, s'il vous plaît,
they're
qui sont
armed,
armés, ils n'ont
and
plus de
these
possibilité d'accéder à tout ce qu'ils avaient comme
local
avantage,
people have
notamment les
no
produits
longer
forestiers non
access
ligneux.
to the
Leur
produce
culture
of the
a été
forest.
dépravée.
Their culture
Ils ont
has
été
been
séparés parce que les familles, et c'est chacun qui
terribly
prenait sa
damaged. They've
direction.
even lost their own
Ils ont
language.
perdu même leur langue.
They've
Il
been
y a eu beaucoup
separated from their
de
families.
problèmes du point de vue
The culture
culturel, surtout tout ce qu'ils devaient pratiquer comme
and
tradition
they
dans
were
leurs
prevented to
terres
practice their
ancestrales.
tradition. And
Et
that's
c'est comme
why
ça que, après beaucoup de recours coutumières, de façon,
the
de façon à
there's never
l'amiable,
been a solution that was
donc il n'y
found
a pas eu de solution
so
pour
that they
qu'ils
can
retournent dans
recoup
leurs terres
their
ancestrales. Et
ancestral
c'est comme ça
land.
qu'à partir
Since
de 2008,
2008,
ils ont
they
intenté un procès en justice,
sued
ce qui est une voie légale autorisée par la Constitution
the
congolaise.
Congolese.
Et quand ils ont intenté
They challenged the
ces
Congolese
recours,
constitution, and their
ils
first
ont
step
commencé par la première
was
voie de recours. Et en République démocratique du Congo, surtout au Sud
the
Kivu, c'est le tribunal de
tribunal
grande instance de Kavumu.
in Kavu.
Ils ont commencé
The
par là.
judge who looked
Le
at
juge qui a
the
reçu le
case
dossier
declared himself
s'est
as
déclaré incompétent, qu'il ne peut pas casser
incompetent
une
and
décision qui
was
a été prise par le président de la République. Ils sont allés en appel
they decided
à la cour
to
d'appel de
appeal,
Bukavu. Le
and
juge à la cour
the
d'appel a
Court of
reconduit
Appeal
la même
reconducted
décision comme
the
celle de
the
la première
decision in
instance.
first instance.
Et comme nous avons une troisième voie de recours, c'est la Cour
After
de
the
cassation,
cassation
nous
court
sommes allés jusqu'à
in
Kinshasa, à
Kinshasa,
la Cour de cassation, pour voir
we
si
wanted to
finalement
see
le
if
gouvernement
the
congolais
government could
pouvait
actually
donner un arrêt qui puisse
respond with an
répondre aux
order that would
revendications des
correspond
peuples
better
autochtones
to
pygmées.
the
Et ces
claims
revendications
of
sont telles
the
qu'ils puissent être
Pygmies
réintégrés
and
dans leurs terres
return to their
ancestrales
ancestral land
et qu'ils puissent être
and receive
dédommagés à cause de tous les
the
préjudices qu'ils
damages
ont
to
subis
compensate for the
depuis
prejudices
plus
they
d'un demi-siècle.
of over
Et que
half
donc,
a century.
nous avons fait
We
beaucoup
worked
de
a
travaux,
lot
beaucoup d'émissions de plaidoyer
on
au niveau local en
at
province,
the local
au
level, at
niveau
the
de la capitale à
Kinshasa,
Kinshasa,
the capital city,
mais
but
jusqu'à
until
cette
now,
heure,
the
la
Cassation
Cour de
Court has
cassation
still
n'a
not
jamais rendu un arrêt
decided
qui puisse répondre
on
aux
a decree that
demandes
would correspond
des
to
peuples
the
autochtones pygmées
need
et
of
Kaouzi-Biega.
the Pygmies
Et
people.
ils continuent à vivre dans des
These people are
situations
still living in
précaires,
dire conditions
alors qu'il y a d'autres communautés qui
when
vivent dans leurs terres ancestrales
there
ou bien
are
dans les paramètres.
communities that
Il y a d'autres
exploit the
communautés qui
natural
exploitent
resources in the
les
national
ressources
parks
naturelles dans le parc national de
of
Kaouzi-Biega,
Kaouzi-Biega.
notamment
There
les
are
minerais, il y a même le braconnage,
poachers,
il y a
there
aussi
is the
la
exploitation of
carbonisation,
wood,
l'exploitation du bois.
and
Et que donc, on se
the
retrouve devant une
extraction
situation où
industry
une
is
communauté a
interested
été
and
exclue
work
alors que
in
c'est elle
these
qui était la
protected
détentrice
areas.
de la terre ou de la forêt au
So
profit d'autres communautés qui exploitent
you chase one
de
people to
façon
allow
illégale les différentes
a,
ressources.
other
Donc,
organizations
quand nous
to
sommes arrivés à ce
work
niveau,
in
au
protected
regard des
areas.
délais
So
qui doivent être
despite
impartis au niveau de
the
la Cour de
effort
cassation,
with going
nous
all the way up
sommes
to
dit
the
que comme
Cassation
la
Court,
République démocratique du
we
Congo
felt that
est
since the
signataire de la Charte
DRC
africaine des droits de
is
l'homme et des
signatory
peuples,
to
nous avons embrassé la phase
the African
régionale
Charter
au niveau
for
de la
the
Cour, de la Commission
rights of
africaine des droits de l'homme et des
men and
peuples.
people.
Voilà, je crois qu'avec ça, nous avons travaillé
We
beaucoup
work
avec
with
Samuel.
Samuel a lot,
Nous
other
travaillons avec
partners.
d'autres partenaires qui sont beaucoup intervenus, notamment la Rainforest Foundation Norway et Minority Rights Groups. Nous sommes aussi
This
avec
is
Force People Group.
my
Voilà
5
donc ce
minutes
que je pouvais
presentation.
présenter dans les premiers moments, sous
And of
réserve
course, I
des
am
questions qui peuvent être
available
posées
for
pour plus
your
de
questions.
clarification. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Marie. Ben, c'était très intéressant et bravo pour tout ce travail parce que c'est
all this kind of marathon with court
tout
and
ce
trials,
marathon
it's
de
really
tribunaux, c'est
long.
un
On the
travail
long
de
run,
longue
it's
haleine
pretty
et c'est très
admirable to have
impressionnant
done this throughout the years.
d'avoir
We're
effectué
going
ça
to
toutes ces années.
talk
On va
again with
revenir
what
effectivement
happened with the
sur
African
ce qui s'est
Commission.
passé avec la African
And
Commission avec
before
Samuel.
that, moving
Mais
back to English on the floor.
avant ça, moving back to English, after these insights, we will now explore some of the international dimensions of fortress conservation. And for this, we welcome Esther Marinian, who is assistant professor at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. Esther is a political ecologist working on nature-society relations in areas of armed conflict. So it's very relevant to where we are today. She's in particular she particularly studies the militarization of nature conservation, which is really what has happened in DRC, and she focused some of her work on Virunga National Park, which is in North Kivu, north of where Jean-Marie is today. Esther, welcome. Can you please tell us about the Western donors agencies involved in the financing of conservation? Are they part of the problem, part of the solution, or both?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Yes, I think they are part of the problem, but they should become part of the solution, to say it very brief. So yeah, I based, my research is based on 12 years of research in and around Virunga National Park, where I have visited all the 3 different sectors from the north to the south and have studied this fortress conservation, but I really, we qualify it now as a new phase of increased militarization of conservation, where it's approached that military solutions, military training, military approaches, also counterinsurgency operations together with the Congolese army and the ICCN is the approach to reach nature conservation. And we see this increasing militarization of conservation with the support of development donors. For example, in Virunga, it's the European Commission that is funding for over the last 20 years now the management of the Virunga National Park, and is also one of the big supporters of the current public-private partnership that manages the park. But if we look from a law enforcement perspective and this militarization, it creates a lot of interesting questions about accountability. When you have a public-private partnership where European NGOs become responsible for the management of the park, but also become a big part of the law enforcement, how can we then hold actors to account when in the case of extensive human rights violations? And what we have seen in Virunga, around Virunga, is that this militarization of conservation was very much justified by the fact that it's of course located within North Kivu, with a lot of armed conflict, with a lot of rebel groups active in and around the park, and that the only option is militarization.
So,
but if this
Esther, can you slow down a little bit for the interpreters, please?
Yes, sorry. Yes, I will do my best. Maybe it's actually better for me to speak in French because then I'm often a bit slower, but I will do. So while militarized conservation is seen as the only possibility in Congo, there's really the creation of this Congo exceptionalism. Like in Congo, there's only one solution, which is military. That this not actually addresses the drivers of the armed conflict or why there are so many rebel groups active around the Virunga National Park, but it actually increases the armed mobilization. So after a moment, you really saw a vicious circle of mobilization, where the more militarization of conservation, the more incentives people had to join armed groups. So when there was a strict cutoff from people from their livelihoods around illegal fishing in Lake Edward, for example, or the charcoal industry or cultivation, this provided a fertile ground for rebel groups to mobilize people to join them, and asking, not always this was of course sometimes also coerced by saying, okay, we will be able to protect you against the armed park guards. In exchange, you will pay us some taxes. So this enforcement around this reinforcement of the armed groups in Virunga was not, of course, was also often a coerced form, and this created armed mobilization instead of actually addressing the insecurity. And in this increasing militarization, you see a lot of human rights violations being happening. And then it becomes very difficult of the question, how, if these violations occur, who to hold to account and where can we go, and who, because it's often when park guards are accused of rape, of torture or murder, it's often the European NGOs or the European funders are saying, oh, this is a Congolese state authority matter. We are not intervening in the Congolese law. This is a case for Congolese justice. But if it all goes well and it's a great success story, then it's suddenly all to attribute to the European donors in this case. So here I think we need to be a bit more fair. And if you take over the responsibility of the management of a park, you need to be held to account as well. And we need to have mechanisms where grievances can be reported, and this should be independently checked. And donors can also put their money to create and strengthen these forms of verifications. And so I think that is for the role of the donors very important. And also to go a bit beyond this idea that Congo is an exception and militarized conservation is the only option. There are many, and what I also want to highlight there is the perspective of the Congolese park rangers. Because by this approach, Congolese park rangers are actually put in a very dangerous situation. They are put on the front line of war to face rebel groups, and they are put in very insecure positions without proper training, without proper support, and they become targets of war. If conservation starts to attack rebel groups, then rebel groups are also going to attack the park guards. And it's also very much from the security and the difficult work that the Congolese park rangers do, it's very important that we are changing this current approach to conservation in Congo, because it was especially now, of course, with the M23 war and the Wazalendo movements in North Kivu, which creates a whole new situation for conservation. But before the M23 were re-emerged, we saw a lot of direct armed attacks on park guards. We heard messages, 10 park guards got killed here, 3 park guards got killed here. So it's also very much in their interest that that shows that this approach is not working, and that we also, their lives are also human lives we need to protect. And they're got in such a difficult situation where, for example, we see a lot of demonstrations happening. So people are demonstrating against the park, but then park guards sometimes get nervous and they can't do proper crowd control and they start shooting, for example. And then civilians get hit. And this creates a frustration and will alienate communities from conservation for 2 or 3 future decades. So this is the proper use of arms. And just to give arms and militarization doesn't work if you can't even do proper crowd control or proper use of guns. So I think this is very important, that we can't go have this militarization of conservation ongoing without the proper checks and balances. I don't know if I was in time or still have time left.
Yes, no, that's perfect. Thank you for respecting the timing, and it was very interesting, and it does also relates to what Jean-Marie was saying just earlier about the presence of minerals, and all this has created all the vacuum created by the removal of indigenous people has actually left these areas open to all kinds of actors, including militias and armed groups coming to exploit the minerals. So we'll come back to that. Thank you so much, Esther. And to stay on the international dimensions, we are very excited to have with us today Samuel Adendassi, joining us from Banjul. Samuel is the African Union Advocacy Litigation Officer for Minority Rights Group, which is MRG by the acronym. Samuel is a senior lawyer specialized in criminal defense. He has played a key role in bringing the case of the Batwa, the one that Jean-Marie was telling us about, bringing it to international justice mechanisms. Samuel, we have heard about the case of PNKB. Can you please share with us how you brought this case to the African Commission on Peoples and Human Rights, and what has been the outcome of this effort?
Thank you very much, Frederic, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone who has had the opportunity to join us today for this very important webinar, which talks about the ills of fortress conservation and X-rails some of the violations of human and people's rights which have been orchestrated against indigenous peoples on the continent, particularly the Batwan of the PNKB of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Just as a point of correction, before I joined MRG, this case was already before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. But right after I joined, we continued with the litigation process right up to the time that we obtained a federal decision on behalf of the Batwan. Just to put things in context, after the failure at the national level to receive redress for the various violations which the Batwan had suffered in the hands of various stakeholders and actors who are operating around the PNKB, the Minority Rights Group International, that's the organization that assists indigenous peoples on the continent to escalate their plight and their voices before international forums, decided to partner with ARND, which Jean-Marie has spoken much about, to take the case to the African Commission. So in early 2015, MRG, jointly with ARND, filed a case, a complaint, before the African Commission, alleging the violation of several rights of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Just to inform all of us here that the African Charter on Human and People's Rights is a principal human rights instrument on the continent, to which 54 of the African states are party to it. Therefore, they have a primary obligation not only to fulfill the rights and to uphold the rights that are in the charter, but also to protect their people from being violated by third parties. The communication trailed a little bit before the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, but by 2022, there was a decision. This decision normally will have to go through the African Union Executive Council for approval and adoption before it is shared with the parties. So that's the process which the decision went through. And finally, in July 4th of 2024, the final decision, which had a little correction, and attached to that decision was a corrigendum that gave a better understanding of the context of fortress conservation to the decision, was made available to the parties to the case. And just to add that the decision is a historic decision and a great win for the Batuan community, the Batuan indigenous peoples of the PNKB. And if time will permit, I would like to highlight some key highlights of the decision. Primarily, the decision urges the government of the DRC to recognize the Batuan as citizens of the DRC. Recognition comes a long way with the benefits of many other rights. And the decision also urges the government of the DRC to restitute all the lands that have been forcefully taken away from the Batuan, land from which the Batuans have been forcefully evicted from, to be handed back to the Batuan through a process that will ensure legal certainty. So we expect that the Batuans will be given back their land in the form of communal titles to the land. The decision also urged the government to pay compensation to the Batuans for all the abuses and murders and rape that have been committed against the Batuans for the periods that the evictions had taken place, that coming right from 1975 right up to 2022, where we, when I talk about we talk about about MRG, when the report was published on the violations that have been taking place there, orchestrated mainly by park guards and the Congolese armed forces. And finally, the decision asked the government of the DRC to offer a public apology to the Batuans for all the violations that the community had suffered in the hands of the government and its agencies. Before I conclude, I just want to say that the decision found that the government of the DRC has violated Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, Article 8, Article 14, Article 16, Article 17, sub 1 to sub 3, Article 21, Article 22, and Article 24 of the African Charter, making a total of about 12 articles of the African Charter that were violated in terms of the Batuan indigenous communities of the PNKB by the various evictions which they have suffered and by the harassment which they continue to face up to this moment that we are having this very important webinar. Some links have been posted on the chat. I encourage everyone to read those links. They are very important reports which will put into context the purpose of this webinar. The report published by the Auckland Institute, From Abuse to Power, and MRG's report on to purge the forest by force, and the report on corporate accountability for those organizations that have been involved in assisting the perpetration of violation of the rights of the indigenous people of the KMPP, that is the Batwan. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and I'm available for a few more minutes for the duration of this webinar to answer questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Samuel. This work you described is really inspiring and promising. There's a lot of expectations. We'll come back later on the larger implications of the decision. I'm going to move back to French
now to speak, talk to Blaise. Blaise, your organization is launching a call to a world without injustice in the management of the natural resources and the conservation of the biodiversity. Could you talk to us about this vision, how this vision can be concretized in DRC? So how do you work differently to change the paradigm, as we said, for many years now? Yes, that's right. Thank you very much. It's hard work that's been made. It's still ongoing because we did a huge work with many partners on this question, because we understood that there's a conservation with the police cannot work in the DRC in regard to the conflicts it generates and regarding the respect of human rights. So we had to work with my partner and brought the different cases of human rights violations to the office. It means that we did a advocacy work. We went to Kinshasa. We worked at the international level to the different donor agencies and donors. And so at the institutional level, we had to intervene. And now we have a human rights cell and office on that. So it does exist now. But what is right is that we are at another narrative level. It's not, we cannot count on it so far or fully. So there is something that's been made, that's been done. The idea was that throughout this, all the communities don't know where to go when they are facing an issue. So the management mechanism of the queries are existing in some parts, but there's a guide. A guide does exist. We've been involved to work on this guide for conservation, so we try to work on the different aspects to be sure that this mechanism could work properly and could help any victim to get in touch with the society to find a solution in this regard. So some tests started in 2022. In Saranga started that time, and now in other parks we are implementing it. In all these sites, we have a man or a team who's working on the human rights issues, and there is adoption of a decision. Sorry.
Et tout ça vient évidemment. Pardon, tu peux dire ce que c'est le clip, s'il te plaît?
It's a free consentment and informed consentment. Free and informed consent. It's the highest. The consent is needed before any action is taken. So if it has been done before, we don't know about the previous situation of what's been with the MKB at that time. So so that the free and informed consent works, it needs to be a management tool, to say so that we can have the acceptation of the communities in this regard. But unfortunately, all this is limited due to some great challenges, political challenges, due to security issues and technical issues and financial issues as well. Because when we see the way the management mechanisms are settled, for example, for us, the idea was that these mechanisms should be managed by a specific structure out of the structure which is managing the protected areas. And unfortunately, what we could see, for example, in Benkabe, the same mechanism was managing the conservation in RDC and DRC, and we are really wondering if all this is going to work properly. And it's really a problem regarding the human rights. There are some troubles regarding the capacity building, because on the different sites where we work, we need to work to strengthen the capacity for the people who are working with the populations to apply the law on conservation and wildlife. And this is highly challenging. So in this context, we will not manage to reach out the conservation goals. We could see what has been made until today. And for many years now, the curve is going down regarding the conservancy, the wildlife conservancy. So we have the possibility today to have protected areas managed by communities, by the people themselves, with local interests. But unfortunately, regarding these rights, the law does not apply because the appropriate measures were not taken to guarantee the application at the local level. So we need to start to think about it and see how we can help on the ground. We need to open up in this regard and to find the way to implement, because it's a difference when there is a theory and if nothing happens concretely on the field. That's precisely what we are criticizing in the report, is that all the abuses we were talking previously, these are mechanisms partly or greatly highly administrative regarding the management of the queries, the question regarding human rights, but there is no big change on the field, and that's specifically what is at stake here. I'm really happy you're talking about that and what it would mean to have the communities in charge of the conservation. It's probably the right way to end the conservation, the fortress conservation. I'm now asking Jean-Marie, with the decision made by the African Convention, what is going to happen at the Commission level? Will the Batois be able to go back to their lands in full security? How will things will happen? Thank you very much to all the panelists. I have to say first that It's a great satisfaction for us as an organization accompanying the indigenous communities and as well as defenders of the community's rights in this well-known context at the east of the DRC. It's a work that needed a lot of energy at the regional level, especially. And I'll take this opportunity to greet all the courts, because if we arrived at this current situation with specific authorizations, because people really worked and really got involved and advocated for the rights of the different indigenous communities in the surrounding countries. And the decision has been released. We accepted it, and then only on 25 and 26 really welcomed this decision, and in September 25 and 26 we could receive official information to let the Batwa population that they have won the trial. Is go on trial with the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's not easy, but as Samuel just described it, the facts were really clear. The violation of many articles from the African Chart of the human people. Why did we wait 3 months to announce the indigenous communities in Batwa that they have won the trial? Well, as we have been living with our communities, we only needed to tell them the victory brutally, I would say, so that they may deploy in the park, and they could have acts in their to give their own justice, and this could have prejudiced the situation. So the decision described the different phases to the reintegration and their own rights. So for us, it was out of question that the Batwa go and make their own justice. For us, it's time to take action, to take big action, to advocate with all the partners and the people working in the park to make pressure on the DRC government to apply the recommendation and to enforce the decisions made under the African Charter. So
de la force contraignante de cette décision. Est-ce que les recommandations
maybe this time the African Convention could incite the governments and the national parks
et le parc national de Kahuzi-Biega à obtempérer tous les temps qu'ils n'ont même pas voulu répondre.
Given that they never responded to all the notifications in all the different jurisdictions at the national level, at our level, we are
nous menons
working
des travaux
at the
à la
grassroots
base
level
pour demander aux
and ask
communautés
communities to
de
be patient
s'apaiser
and
et
wait for the
d'attendre
application
la mise en application tout en étant dans leur
and
village, là où ils
wait
ont
until
été
they can get
reçus,
back to their
et
village.
par des voies pacifiques.
This is more or less where
Voilà
we
un
are
peu
now.
donc là où nous en sommes. Mais dans les réunions que nous venions de faire avec
With our
les partenaires
partners,
de
with
et d'autres à
partners,
distance, et notamment Samuel,
and
les
the fact
Batois pensaient
that
que le fait qu'on ait
we
rendu la
showed
décision
them
leur
that
donne le
decision
feu vert
was made gives them the
d'entrer
green
tout
light.
droit dans leurs 6 collines
But we
qu'ils ont bien
felt
identifiées. Mais nous avons
that
senti que
this
cette
mission
mission
was
a été d'une
tremendously
grande
important.
importance et que donc les Batois
We
sont là
are,
apaisés.
however,
On ne va pas se cacher la vérité. Il y a une petite portion
going
des
to say
Batois
that there
qui
is a
étaient déjà
small
là
portion of the
dans
Batwa
les limites du
who
parc
were
avant la
within the
sortie de
limits
la
of the park
décision.
before the
Nous
decision.
sommes en train de travailler là-dessus
We are
aussi pour voir dans quelle mesure
working
tout ce qu'il y a comme exploitation
on
illicite ne peut pas leur être imputé parce
the,
qu'il y a
the
maintenant
illicit
les différents
activities
exploitants,
that should not
des
be,
commerçants
they should not
qui
be
viennent
blamed
des deux
for.
grandes villes, de Bukavu et de Goma, qui profitent de la présence de
But
cette
there
portion de
are
Batwa dans les parcs nationaux
populations who are
pour aller
exploiting the
finalement
presence of
exploiter à
the
grande
Batwa
échelle
to
les
go
différentes ressources.
and
Et
exploit
souvent,
the
tout cela
situation
va
at
sur les
a
dos des
big
Batwa.
scale.
Alors que eux, quand ils sont là, apparemment, ils ne sont que comme main-d'œuvre. On
That's
les
where
utilise.
we are at the moment.
Voilà là où nous en sommes aujourd'hui.
Thank you very much,
Merci
Jean-Marie.
beaucoup, Jean-Marie. C'est justement
This is
ce que
what Esther is going to talk
Esther
about
va
or touch
discuter
upon.
maintenant.
But I just wanted to
Je voulais juste
summarize what you've
faire
just
un point
said,
sur ce que tu viens
because
de
this
dire. C'est
decision
vraiment,
is
on peut se réjouir de cette
coming at
décision,
the
mais c'est
right
vraiment le
moment where
moment
we need to
d'avoir une
mobilize
mobilisation
all the
générale de tous les
actors, the
acteurs, que ce soit les
NGOs,
grosses ONG
the
internationales, que ce
donors,
soit
and of course the
les
government
bailleurs de fonds et
to
bien sûr le
make sure
gouvernement,
that this
et pour faire en
decision
sorte
is
que
going
cette
to be
décision
implemented
soit
and
applicable. Et
that
on comprend
we
bien
are aware of
les,
all the
les
challenges
challenges, les
of this
enjeux aujourd'hui de cette
implementation. Thank you
application.
very much, Jean-Marie.
Donc, merci beaucoup,
Esther.
Jean-Marie. Esther, one of the arguments we have heard, and we've just heard that again from Jean-Marie, and what we've heard from the park management and organizations like WCS, is that the problem that the Batwa are responsible for deforestation, notably through the production of charcoal. Can you tell us what your thoughts are on that, please?
Yes. So in the case of Virunga about the charcoal industry, it's a bit different than the Kahuzi Biega, but I think there are many similarities that, well, it's often the Batwa or poor people are often criminalized about their participation in the charcoal industry. It's often people often only really go into parks to do charcoal if they're in a very desperate situation. If they are really, because if you calculate, I spoke to people that have been going into Virunga and to do charcoal, and if you make the calculation about how much money they actually earn to do the charcoal, what they are left with at the end of the day of the whole process, it might be $1 or $2. The thing is, where most of the money is being made around charcoal is by middlemen. It's by sometimes at times the FRDC soldiers that are allowing this charcoal, or they often the Batwa or poor people around Virunga, they are mobilized and they do the hard work, the hard labor. But it's the businessmen, it's the middlemen. There are at times rebel groups as well, but especially also the Congolese army that actually does a lot of the distribution around the charcoal, and there the money is being made. So a lot of to tackle really the charcoal problem, because it is a problem, it does contribute deforestation. It's often also, especially the role of the Congolese army that needs to be acknowledged, that often plays an important role in facilitating this charcoal business.
Thank you, Esther. That's very helpful to understand the complexity of this illicit extraction activities. Samuel, you share this historic decision for DRC, and like MRG at the Oakland Institute in Kenya or Tanzania, we have challenged for many years these evictions of the very stewards of the land for the purpose of conservation. Today, the problem is even more concerning given the 30 by 30 initiative that intends to protect 30% of the planet by 2030 and might result, the way things are, in more evictions and abuses. So how do you see the implication of the Commission's decision beyond DRC? Is the African Union leading the way to challenge forest conservation on the continent overall?
Thank you very much, Federica. This is a very, very important question you have just posed. And it brings us to the point where we have to make very, very strong statements regarding indigenous peoples and the role they play in nature preservation and biodiversity preservation. We are talking about a category of people whose main activities, for example, for the Batwans, they are hunter-gatherers. And when we hear that they are involved in the charcoal industry, we might be wondering, when did they change from becoming hunter-gatherers to becoming commercial traders in charcoal? And I wish we had more time to discuss on this issue to bring out the lies that have been told in respect of indigenous people. But there's a saying that goes that when you give a dog a bad name, you hang the dog. And this is what has been happening. Indigenous peoples have been labeled all kinds of names for the sole purpose of taking them out of their traditional ancestral lands so that third parties can be allowed into the land to cause the carnage which we are experiencing, deforestation, destruction of biodiversity, and pollution of the environment, which is all leading to global warming. Now, the conclusion is that this means of fortress conservation is not working. It is based on a false premise that nature and biodiversity will be preserved when indigenous people are taken, or when human inhabitation is taken out of the area that needs to be conserved. That is false. It does not work. Wherever this process of conservation has been involved, within a few years, it has been discovered that more damage has been done to the environment and to biodiversity than when human presence was in the area concerned. I guess that will be a topic for another day. But let me speak to what the Commission said and the implications of the Commission's decision in a wider context. I want to first of all start by saying that the Commission's decision builds on previous decisions, both from the African Commission itself in the Indigenous case, which was also litigated by Minority Rights Group International, and the Ogie case of Kenya, also litigated by Minority Rights Group. Now, before I come to what the decision in the Batwan case says, let me first of all state what the African Court has stated, that first, indigenous peoples are the best guardians of the environment and biodiversity. Let me repeat again, indigenous peoples are the best guardians of nature and biodiversity. That was stated in the Indigenous case and also in the Ogie case. Now, in the DRC case, the Batwan case, the Commission went further to state that the system of conservation, which we now are calling fortress conservation, has failed or is ineffective in the PNKB. Now, what this means is that everywhere where the model of conservation, which involves the eviction of indigenous peoples from their traditional land, and wherein they are prevented from having access to that land, has failed, not only in the DRC, but also in Africa as a whole. Now, that is the first time any international human rights body has made this pronouncement that fortress conservation has failed. And it has great implications for indigenous peoples in the sense that, and what the commission said is that going further, if indigenous peoples are taken out of their ancestral land for the purpose of conservation, we are looking at a situation where that land will be subjected to more damage and there'll be huge loss in biodiversity. That is the implication. So we hope that going forward in Africa, the system where indigenous people are being taken out of the land, be it in Tanzania, where the Maasais are being evicted from Liliondo and Ngorongoro, or to Kenya, where we are still having the eviction of the Oget from the Mao complex, and also in the various parks in the DRC. From some years to come, we will discover that those areas will have gone through a higher degree of degradation and loss in biodiversity, which is ironical to the model of fortress conservation, which is being advocated now. The second implication of the decision is that the Commission and the court have explained that for biodiversity and forest for nature conservation to be properly preserved, stakeholders must work hand in hand with indigenous people, the original or traditional inhabitants of the place to be conserved, because that place has remained the way it is because those who have been living there has applied traditional knowledge in protecting and conserving the environment and the forest. This is because they have a symbiotic relationship with the forest. They benefit the forest, and the forest also benefits from their presence in the forest. And in a symbiotic relationship, when you take out one of the parties, what you realize is that the other party dies out. So state parties and stakeholders are encouraged to work hand in hand with indigenous peoples to be able to protect the environment. I'll give you a short example in 2 minutes, then I'll give the floor back to you.
A bit less than 2 minutes, please.
Yes, indigenous people, for example, when they go hunting, they will not hunt the female species of any animal because they realize that for continuity, the female species must be kept alive for procreation purposes and for continuity. But other hunters who come for trophy hunting, like in all the other hunting parks, they kill indiscriminately. And before we know it, particular species disappear. Because if all the female species are killed, then there is no way to ensure continuity in the particular species. That is one traditional knowledge that has been employed by indigenous peoples in their communities that has assisted to make sure that the fauna and flora are preserved. Thank you very much, and I hope I can have another minute to speak.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel, and sorry for cutting you short, but we are already reaching the official end of the webinar. But I think you did a great job at making this case on why do we need to end fortress conservation and really move to really actual community-led conservation, which is not necessarily what we have seen happening recently in DRC. Before we conclude, I just wanted to highlight, come back to this massive challenge for this change of paradigm in the case of DRC, which is the close relationship between conservation and extractive industries, in particular the exploitation of minerals such as gold, tantalum, cobalt, and so on. Illicit extraction has fueled the war that has been raging there for 30 years now. It has killed 6 million people, 6 million. Over 4 million people are currently displaced in Eastern DRC. In the region, violence and corruption in and around the parks are really, and we've seen that with several of our panelists, are really linked to this extraction of natural resources. Just last week, the DRC President Tshisekedi called at the UN General Assembly for sanctions against Rwanda, which is active with its military through the support it provides to the M23 rebel movement. And our report details why Western countries, starting with the US, that support Rwanda, and firms like Tesla, Apple, and other tech companies who are benefiting from the plundering of DRC resources, why these actors must take action or be held accountable for their role in the devastation we are talking about. So wherever we are, there is a role we can all play, both as consumers or concerned citizens, to take action. We clearly need to mobilize, and when we talk about the mobilization of all stakeholders, it includes us. I'm very sorry we are exceeding our time, so I won't do a last round with the panelists, and I'm afraid we won't be able to take questions. But we left in the chat the email address for the institute where you can send your questions, and we can forward them or answer them ourselves if it's for us. There were a few useful links in the chat that I encourage you to check out for several of the organizations and resources. Finally, I wanted to thank very warmly all the panelists for their insightful presentations and the discussion. Very frustrated it's too short, and maybe we need to organize another webinar sometime soon. But thank you, each one of you, for joining and deciding to spend time with us today. Thank you to the Auckland Institute team and the interpreters. Sorry for speaking too fast sometimes. And just the last word to say, the webinar was recorded in French and English, and we'll make it available next week on our website and social media. So we hope you'll consider sharing it with your friends and colleagues, and that you'll stay tuned. So we'll now close the webinar. Thank you again all, and goodbye.